Now we are on to our last segment. I hope this was helpful for everyone because we filmed EIA, we filmed Frac Spread Count today, and now we're filming the econ. So hopefully, this you're kind of seeing how this is all connecting, why all of this is so important, how one really kind of drives the other. But before we get into it, again, I'd like to remind you, please like, share, subscribe. Your support is appreciated, and then we do have our end of year report. So this was an interesting chart that's diverging opinions in Asian and English-speaking views on democracy. And Japan is an exception to the trend in Asian democracy, where there's greater dissatisfaction with democracy. And you're seeing the U.S. increase exponentially. We've seen the U.K., same thing, but we've seen Taiwan, South Korea, Philippines get less dissatisfied with it. And again, everything ebbs and flows. This is not something that's in a straight line. If you showed this in other periods of time, you'd see something similar, and then it gets better. I just want to highlight why the U.S. is happening the way it is, because I think this is an interesting thing that leads into other components. And it's really because we've lost social mobility. And what does that mean? When my family came here in the 20s and 30s, from Italy, me being second generation, if you came, you were supported by your community. There was a community aspect where the community helped you. You didn't rely on the government. You didn't rely on even the local. You didn't rely on the local taxpayer. You relied on those around you. We call them ghettos. Now it has a negative connotation, but back then, a ghetto was you lived with like people, and you had the Irish, the Italians, the Germans. They built schools, they built Catholic schools. They did things to take care of each other and lift each other up. And we really lost that sense of community overall. And everyone just relies on the government will take care of it. I pay enough in taxes; they'll cover me. And it's not, because as we said in the last segment with food banks, people need help, and we're not getting the support that we need. But with the lack of social mobility, and back to my family, and others can say the same, as we've shown with people that were able to do better than their parents, and the boomers were able to do better than their parents, but they were able to do better than their parents, because if you came to America, you worked hard, you put your head down, you put in the time, you succeeded. You were able to buy a home. You were able to earn a pension. You were able to have a retirement. And you had families that went from living with their brothers and sisters in a tiny apartment to owning a home in the suburbs. And you were able to achieve that. And now, no matter how hard you try, there's that social mobility is becoming harder and harder to obtain with these stupid valuations and monopolies that are just buying up. And we're seeing obviously more automation, so less jobs, because we essentially need a new industry to help hire these people back. And as you have more and more people unemployed, that again weighs on just how much can people actually get in there? Can you get wage growth? Are you seeing wage growth? And we're really not seeing wage growth, which again is social mobility. So if people then turn to democracy and say, well, that's the problem. And it's like, well, it's the way democracy is being instilled and interpreted and used, and this isn't democracy. So essentially I'm going to take stupid risk, and if I fail, the government will bail me out. So you're privatizing profits and you're socializing losses. And again, this is the failure of why we need the business cycle, why it's okay to have a failure, because we built this country, we built America with a very robust bankruptcy system. Why? Because we wanted it to be okay to fail, go through bankruptcy. Is it a viable business? Will people support you? And if they will, you come out. If you don't, you get liquidated. And it's okay to fail. And instead, we've incentivized these zombie companies and these things that just suck up capital but really add no value to the general economy, to jobs and to tax revenue. Because if I'm not earning revenue, then I'm not paying you taxes. I have enough tax losses to offset. I have ways to do. And again, these are things that have to be cleared. And we're seeing that come into the way, and I mean, this can get into the politics of it all, and which we'd like to avoid. But again, like the social mobility is the one that you have to look at. The lack of social construct, the lack of community is really driving these failures. And we really have to take a hard look on how are we spending, how are we trying to prop up some of these failed entities, and is it okay to let some of them fail and go through the process of restructuring? And these are things that we're going to have to look at as we go through the next decade, which I think is going to be a very difficult decade. That's going to be a mixture of the 30s with deflation and the 70s with inflation. And it's going to be a very unique time. And we've done shows on the US dollar, on inflation, on deflation. So, we're out there, we've talked about it. We think that we go through a period of inflation to a period of deflation to a period of, semi-hyperinflation, which is going to be problematic. But again, these are things to watch and look at as we approach this MMT, this debt bubble that just has been a super cycle of 20 plus years. But when we think about, okay, well, where do we reside? Where does this end up? And we come back to some of the things that we want to keep in front of everyone's mind. Obviously, there's, a Himalayas winter is not when you really make aggressive moves on a military level just due to snow cover. But we just want to keep this in everyone's mind where Ladakh's biggest helipad projects, India is constructing 36 new helipads to connect remote locations across the region. This is important because India was able to make a big move to secure the high ground. Now, near the border areas with China, which also shows how these new landing zones could boost military operations. Nothing is going to happen right now because it's the winter, it's terrible up there, it's the Himalayas, but what happens in March, April, May, June? They didn't end on a good note. And when you look at the RCEP trade deal with India not participating, India is testing more firepower in the Bay of Bengal. The U.S. and China continue to have friction points with another one in the Strait of Taiwan and in the Spratly Islands, where that we had freedom of navigation acts, and obviously China wasn't very happy about it, and they made that known, but we continue to do them. Again, we had a submarine surface to send a message in the Persian Gulf, and how long was it there? We may announce it, but it doesn't mean it wasn't there for 2 months. And these are things that we have to appreciate in terms of where is this going, and the providing that 24/7 connectivity to strategic areas in Ladakh is very important. And you can see the Twitter handle at the bottom. I highly recommend following him. He's been fantastic or him or her, not to gender assume, but here is just a fantastic amount of information that is coming out, that is being allocated, and we really need to watch because this is going to be a flashpoint. And if you just going back to the to the U.S. budget, there was language put in there about the Tibet glaciers. Why? Because Tibet glaciers is an issue for China. China has 20 some odd percent of the world's population, 20% of the world's population, 12% of the world's arable land, and 6% of the world's fresh water. This is why the Indus Water Treaty matters. Why the fights in areas where there is plentiful glaciers, why they've continued to dam up rivers that have caused man-made droughts in Southeast Asia. These are things that have to be considered when you look at the strategic moves China is making, and how not only the Southeast Asia, how India, but also the U.S. is going to interact as we come out, where Biden takes over in the beginning of the new year. How are we going to handle Australia? Australia and China continue to be in an aggressive trade war, and I don't see us taking the side of China in this battle as we continue to move military assets throughout the system, try to show freedom of navigation, and I don't see Biden changing that at all, because it was during the Obama presidency where the pivot to Asia was made famous. And I've beaten this to death, and I can post again the comments that we had in our May 29th show when we called all of this happening 2 weeks before it happened, that there will be problems. But let's look at China. What has China continued to do? You see an additional new trade route that has gone through Turkey. So the first cargo train has made its inaugural. There we go. Sorry, it's been a long day. A move through the system through Kazakhstan into Turkey, which is 10 to 15 days. Again, they're trying to do things that mitigate the Strait of Malacca. Why? Because the U.S. practices twice a year closing the Strait of Malacca. So, what does it mean? It means that if we shut it down, they can't get trade in and out, and about 60 to 70% of Chinese trade goes through the Strait of Malacca. So it's also 45 to 60 days to get to Europe. So when we look at going through Kazakhstan and going to Turkey, it's 10 to 15 days. Going through Russia, it's 15 to 20 days. You're cutting half the time, and now you can't move as much, but again, if you can do it in half the time, then you can move 2 trains and you can move them back through and you can increase, and you take away a choke point in the system. Now, I'm not saying that Russia is friends with China, because they're not. They were within an hour of the LAC line of actual control impact. Russia came out and defended and supported India. So again, it's just a matter of where these movements take place and how to appreciate how this all builds in. Now, the last thing that we want to talk about on a geopolitical update are the hardliners continue to take back power in Iran. This is going to be important as we go into, as we talked about, the election later next year, which should happen, I believe it's June or July. I apologize for forgetting the exact month, but it's June or July. And this is going to be a bigger issue as we look at how will Biden interact with India, with Iran, with the JCPOA. Are we going to see a relationship with Iran? And I just think that I think we're closer to a regime change than further away. It doesn't have to be an aggressive one, as the 1979 revolution was. Obviously, people died. I'm not saying it wasn't bloody, but it wasn't as bloody as others that we've seen in terms of regime changes. And it'll all come down to where does the IRGC or the Iranian Revolutionary Guard, who do they back? Who do they support? Because we continue to see the populace turn against the current hardliners. And that is going to be a bigger issue, as 85% or so of the populace does not support this shift from 2016 to 2020, as we do see more reformers coming in, more independents coming in. So it's going to be important to see, because this is showing from 16 to 20. Well, what does 20 to 21 look like? And this is going to be, I think, an important piece of the information. Now, looking at India's Diwali, we talked about it. It was not a super spreader event, so case positivity rate is coming down. Confirmed cases continuing to come down. This is a positive direction for where we sit. So hopefully we see something similar with our Christmas. But again, what does this mean for a new strain? Because obviously India is highly populous. If the new strain gets out, obviously things are denser, and this strain is being proven to be more virulent and contagious, less deadly, which is a positive. But again, if we look at confirmed cases, you kind of see a little bit of a bottoming out. So again, we just want to see this continuing to move. It's still above 2%, so we still have a net increase, but again, right direction all around. Now, when we look at economic releases, because we've picked on China a lot, now let's look at some of the others. And you can see that Japan is facing a very big slowdown that we've been highlighting. And when you look at convenience store sales year over year, they're a little bit better, but supermarket sales are slowing, and nationwide department sales, Tokyo department sales are down big year over year, 14.3%, 17.8%, because again, new resurgence in COVID cases causing people to do less. We're seeing more pain and fear overall. Machine tool orders, again, kind of flattish. October is better than expected, but again, this is before we had this resurgence that is starting to slow things down. Then when we turn to South Korea, department store sales were down. Prior was up 4.2%. Now we're down 4.3%. Discount store sales were up 2.3%. Now down 4.1%. Again, moving in the wrong direction as we get a resurgence of cases across the board. which again, now you might laugh because the U.S. is many times over what they are, but it just shows the different ways that people are addressing an increase in cases, which is going to become a much bigger issue. You know, Thailand, as we keep talking about exports and imports, you know, Thailand exports missed to the downside, imports missed to the were actually missed to the upside. Again, so we're starting to see some adjustments, but again, the exports remain a problem. And it's just going to be a matter of how do we start to get some of this normalization. And it's why everything's happening in kind of spits and starts with South Korean exports. So as we've been talking about, South Korean exports total were missed to the downside, and they were only up 1.2%. They were expected to be up 4%. You know, then you look at South Korean imports; they were supposed to be up, and they were supposed to be down about 2%. Instead, they were down 8%. Again, these are the things that we continue to see, where the pain is just being pressured in the global market. South Korea, Japan continue to slow down, and they are very large economies in comparison to other nations. And this is why when we look at Asian oil demand, Asian demand of refined products, the South Korean trade is just an example. The Japanese slowdown is just an example. Indian slowdown that we continue to see is the examples of why we continue to be concerned into the next year. Singapore, same thing. Exports are down year over year. They were expected to be up 0.3%. Instead, they were down 4.9%. Here, India headline sales manage again. The slowdown is here, where we had a strong bounce, and now we're seeing that slowdown. So as we showed with the Singapore, again, things are just shifting and slowing, and we're not seeing the same type of follow through that was hoped for. Now, when we look at China and what China has been doing, you know, as we talked about in the show, Chinese Communism Rising, semiconductor equipment continues to be a huge driver for China, because they're looking to build out their technological abilities, you know, trying to get away and diversify their supply chains and become more self-sufficient. Again, the dual circulation system, they want to integrate more purchasing within, which turns to Alibaba. Like, you look at Baba, they sanctioned Baba 500,000 renminbi. They canceled one of their IPOs. You're seeing this concern or this shift of, well, SOEs and state operators, communists, you know, from the CCP, they do it better. And the reason why we don't have local demand is because we need income redistribution. And again, these are things that we're seeing, that we're starting to hear about. And this is being filed under national security, income redistribution, you know, trying to address the bigger issues because the local demand continues to underperform. Now, what are some of the issues that we continue to see? Global iron ore imports, you know, China accounts for 70% of global iron ore imports, but we have global iron ore prices exploding. They've come down a little bit, but again, they're still at multi-year highs. You have coal prices at multi-year highs, even though they have come down a little bit. Again, these are things that are real impacts to the local consumer and real impacts to, well, how am I going to be competitive in the international market if my input costs are exploding? Again, coal and iron ore is also because of the Australian issues and trade war. But how am I going to compete in the international market if my prices are going to go up? And we know, as we talked about in previous episodes, it costs 1.2% of GDP to try to maintain a large size of exports in a slowing global trade market where exports are just shrinking overall, and China's trying to earn a bigger piece of the pie. You know, their imports have increased exponentially from the U.S., especially across grains, because they are just so short food, which again is driving up prices, hurting the local consumer, which has to be offset, which means that you get less tax revenue because you give forgiveness on tariffs or reduced VAT taxes, you know, things that you're trying to do, or you're just paying people outright in more unemployment or more subsidies to try to maintain the view that you've eradicated poverty in China, as President Xi has claimed earlier this month, or it could have been the end of November. Again, these are things that are going to continue to be an issue. And that's why when we look at state ownership of smaller banks, it's increasing. Why? Because a lot of these banks need support, and a lot of these banks are getting support from the local state because the PBOC said you need to step in. So city and rural commercial banks with controlling state shareholders is increasing and has been increasing since 2010. Again, these are things that have to be considered when we're looking at where does the risk fall? Because people will say, well, it's self-contained debt, even though it's 360% of local GDP, it's fine. Like but is it like how are the local supporting this? If we know tax revenue is falling, if we know tax cuts are coming, have come for the last several years, we're going to get more in 2021 as we did in 2020. Tax revenue is starting to fall. So how are they going to finance the special purpose bonds that were issued in 2016 that don't yield any income and need to be financed with tax revs, and you have tax revs falling? This is why the conundrum continues to be. I don't understand how there's no real digging into some of the data and the problems that we continue to see. But again, these are things that we just try to highlight, try to point to as real issues going forward. And this is just, again, one of our high-level updates as we've done deeper dives in previous episodes, and we'll do more deeper dives going forward. But again, like they continue to buy soybeans, grains continues to be an issue as wheat's up up 13, beans are up 11, corn's up 3, and even though we have different grain silos saying that within the U.S. that they're not taking any more, specifically corn, because they're just full, but the export market continues to be robust with more beans going off into the sunset, and China setting a record. So again, these are things to watch as especially as the U.S. sees more food inflation and the world sees more food inflation, and a nationalistic push comes to, well, maybe we should hold some of this back for ourselves and protect pricing. Again, these are things that continue to be a bigger issue. So thanks again for watching. I know we covered a lot. If you have any questions, please reach out, comments, email, Twitter. You know where to find me. You know where to find us in general. So thanks again for watching. Please have a happy, safe holiday, safe travels. Merry Christmas to those. Happy Hanukkah. I know Hanukkah is past. Happy Festivus. Again, a lot of holidays, a lot of things to celebrate getting through this tough year with our families. And hopefully, 2021 is a brighter year. So thanks again for watching. I'm Mark Rossano, founder and CEO of C6 Capital Holdings, coming to you from Primary Vision Network.